I think the most important thing to note is that we're all people. We try very hard to keep humanity, dignity, and respect at the forefront of everything that we do. Proximity changes everything. When we're able to come into relationship with individuals, there's just no limit to what can be accomplished.
Welcome to the You've Heard It Said podcast. I'm Allie.
And I'm Jason. Today we're going to be talking about people who are impacted by incarceration and how we can love them as our neighbors.
One of the ways that our church actually gets to support that is through the Pando app, which is a library of content on iPads that people who are incarcerated can watch with sermon content and all kinds of Christian content that they can watch. And actually what's really cool about that is that a fifth of our salvations from Lifechurch Online actually come through the Pando app.
And I know even our team has recently got to work on something where when people make the decision to follow Jesus using the Pando app, they can actually let us know, and we'll start sending letters like paper letters.
Old school.
Yes. Yes. And it's full of discipleship content, and then people here on staff and volunteers are sending these letters back and forth. And it's just like really cool thing, especially because right now in our country, the number of people who are incarcerated is over 1 million. Yeah. And if you think of people who are somehow under supervision by the criminal justice system, I think back in 2021, it was close to 5 million people. Oh, wow. And this group of people, they don't have a lot of access to church or even church resources. Yep. And so things like Pando or these letters are important, but also they really need relationships with people. And that's about the extent of what I know.
Right, which then begs the question, what do we do? How do we love our neighbors who are incarcerated or families affected by it or people who are recently coming out of incarceration?
Yeah, so we're going to talk with some people who actually do know, some people who are actually doing this. And one of them is Chris Steele. Yes. He's been on the podcast before.
He's amazing.
And he works with Team here in Oklahoma City. And he has a ton of ideas, but not just ideas, things they're doing that are working and things that'll work all across our country.
And then Sam from our life group is going to be talking with Nate Rudek, who has a ton of experience volunteering in prisons. Yeah.
Chris, thank you so much for joining us again here on the You've Heard It Said podcast. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Likewise. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, okay, Chris, you're the executive director here at Team, an organization here in Oklahoma City that helps individuals and supports them, those individuals who are involved in the criminal legal system. Can you tell us a little bit about your story and how you first got involved in this area?
Sure. So what brought me to this area, honestly, is that prior to moving into the nonprofit realm, I had the opportunity to serve in the state legislature within Oklahoma. And it was actually during that experience, I was there for 12 years, and it was during that experience that I became familiar with just how much money Oklahoma was spending on incarceration and how many people were going to prison within our state. And as I began to study the issue and seek to understand kind of the dynamics that were leading people into the criminal legal space, I began to realize that there are some outliers within our state. And then I became very familiar when I came face to face with the harm and the challenges that being involved in the criminal legal system can impose on an individual and their families, and just began to seek an opportunity to try to serve, to mitigate some of those challenges, those barriers, and really try to be a part of something that would help fellow Oklahomans move forward and reach their full potential in life.
That's amazing. I love that. Chris, can you talk about some of the specific ways that people might be impacted in the criminal legal system and some of the problems that they might face? Sure.
So what the research would tell us, and then what the actual reality bears out, is that a person who becomes involved in the criminal legal system, especially a person who has to be incarcerated, faces a myriad of challenges. So they are labeled as a convicted felon, and that felony conviction generally stays with the person for life.
Wow. Okay.
So well after they have paid their debt and served their time of incarceration, they still carry the designation of convicted felon. That designation can act as a scarlet letter that can exclude a person from most employment opportunities, most housing opportunities, most educational opportunities, and a myriad of issues that prevent a person from participating pro-socially within our community. And so what we do here at Team is we seek to identify and eliminate as many barriers as possible so that when a person is legally allowed to reenter our community, they have a foundation to build upon and resources necessary to move forward in becoming a productive member of our community.
So let's talk about Oklahoma specifically. How does Oklahoma compare nationally to some of those problems, and what maybe makes Oklahoma unique in some of the problems that they face?
Well, the reality is that Oklahoma statistically and proportionately has one of the highest incarceration rates per capita of any state in the nation. And for nearly 30 years, we actually led the world in female incarceration per capita. And I will tell you, in those 3 decades, there were a myriad of research projects that took place to try to understand what was causing Oklahoma's high female incarceration rates. And the most common characteristic among women who are incarcerated in Oklahoma today is domestic violence and abuse. In fact, about 54% of all the women in prison today have been a victim of abuse in the year prior to their entering incarceration. And so the number one factor is domestic violence and abuse. Number 2 is unresolved trauma. And so what happens in Oklahoma is that oftentimes a woman who has experienced abuse doesn't have access to the support, to the counseling, to the help that she needs to process through that trauma. And trauma left unresolved tends to manifest itself in antisocial behavior over the course of time. Number 3 is untreated mental illness. And again, these are all connected. So unresolved trauma can cause anxiety, it can cause depression, it can cause a myriad of mental health challenges left untreated, can manifest itself in ways that would be outside social norms. And so any one of these pathways or these driving factors, if they're left unaddressed, can ultimately cause a person to become involved in the criminal legal space in Oklahoma. The end result is that when a person becomes involved in the criminal legal system, it can begin a generational cycle. There's federal data that would suggest that children of incarcerated parents are about 7 times more likely to become involved in the criminal legal space over the course of their life.
Wow. Chris, a lot of just sad and heavy statistics that you shared, but there is hope. And Team is a really big part of that hope that you guys really just give back specifically to our Oklahoma City community. Could you share what are some of those ways that you guys bring hope? How do you give back? How do you come alongside those individuals and help them move past that state of their life that they've been in?
We're serving somewhere in the neighborhood of about 2,700 individuals a year. We have 8 different programs that are designed and specifically geared to unique populations within our criminal legal system. But we do everything from securing release from jail on a pretrial if a person gets stuck in the detention center simply because of an inability to pay their bond. We provide connection to stable housing, to sober living, to employment. We provide connection to treatment services, to legal aid, to legal services. And we make sure a person has everything they need ultimately to move forward and to pursue their goals. We develop relationships. We develop transition plans with the individual so that they know where they're going to be living, and that's all squared away. They know what they're going to be doing for employment. They know what they're going to be doing for transportation, and they have a game plan in place prior to coming back into the community. And then we see those individuals through for at least 12 months after they reenter society just to make sure that they're doing well and have not only proper accountability but also proper support.
Wow. I'm just blown away by how thorough you guys are. If someone is watching today, and I know that there are going to be many people who are inspired by your story and all that you've shared with us today, and they want to get involved, what is some advice that you would give to them? And maybe what are some things that you might tell them to keep in mind?
Yeah. I think the most important thing to note is that we're all people. We try very hard to keep humanity, dignity, and respect at the forefront of everything that we do. Proximity changes everything. When we're able to come into relationship with individuals, there's just no limit to what can be accomplished.
Wow, I love that. Really appreciate you being on the podcast with us today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Hey, Nate, how's it going?
Going awesome, man. Great to be here.
So today we're talking about prison ministry and what it looks like to get involved with ministry to people who are currently incarcerated or who are just coming out of incarceration. And so I know that you're currently involved in prison ministry, so I'd love to hear your perspective on what it looks like, how to get started.
It really looks like doing anything else, honestly. We're going to serve our neighbors. We're going to serve people. The reality is 95% of the men and women that are actually in prison will one day be our neighbor. And so the way I view prison ministry is just an extension of the church. We're doing what Jesus called us to do, which is to go to those that are in need and to serve them. And there's so many different steps to get involved, but it's actually very simple. Every state has different requirements to be involved in prison ministry, but all of them require contacting the prison first and letting them know you want to be involved. And then they will help walk you through what their process is to become a volunteer. I can speak for Oklahoma because that's where I live. And in Oklahoma, we actually go through what's called a badge class. It's a one-time class, and then it gets me an actual badge for 6 years where I can go to the prison and serve. And so that's the first step. For most states is some sort of connection with the prison, letting them know you're interested in volunteering, interested in serving, and then they will walk you through what their process is for their prison. So, yeah.
So what got you started in prison ministry? Can you tell us about your journey of discovering this as a passion and you getting involved?
Yeah, it's an interesting journey. So growing up, my dad actually worked for the Department of Corrections. He started out as a corrections officer, and then moved his way up as he finished his education, became a counselor for a while, was a probation and parole officer, and then eventually became a warden of prisons. And I always would be adjacent to prisons because of my dad, but I always saw him love and care for them just like they were anybody else. And, as a kid, you kind of have this picture in your head of what a prisoner is. And my dad never treated anybody different. And so growing up, I saw his example of we treat these people like they're our neighbors. And to be really honest with you, I did not want to do prison ministry because I grew up around it. Mm-hmm. But then I actually ended up in a valley myself. And I ended up isolated, struggling with addiction. And it was during that season of my life that I realized that not only am I made in God's image, but everyone else is too. And whenever God restored me, I wanted to give back. And the first place I started to look into was actually giving back to prisoners and to people that were locked up for various mistakes they'd made, because I wanted them to hear that same message, that they were made in God's image and that somebody cared for them and they weren't forgotten.
Yeah, that's great. Like there's a level of empathy that comes from being in proximity,
Yeah.
I had a certain view of people who are experiencing incarceration, until I had a family member who experienced it through choices that they made. And that changed a lot of how I thought about that group of people. So you go to a prison, you've got your badge.
Yeah.
What does prison ministry actually look like for you?
So there's just several different things I actually have participated in at prison ministry, all the way from taking Lifechurch online to prisons and actually, doing a whole service. I've done that, as well as one of our local mission partners is Prison Fellowship, and they do something called an academy in prisons. And the academy is teaching them life skills and faith values at the same time. And so I've been a teacher at the academy. But the thing that I love most about going into the prison is actually just the time between the classes where we're hanging out and we're talking. And I'm realizing that these are everyday men and women just like me. They have families, they have kids, they have things they care about, they have things they're stressed about. And I get to pray with them, I get to be a friend for them, and I get to support them. And that's my favorite thing I do. But I've done everything from literally teaching a class to just being there to pray with somebody. The other thing that I've really started to learn more about is the kids that are left behind. And there's so many different avenues for serving the families. We call them caretakers that are taking care of the kids of these inmates. There's a whole nother side of ministry there that you don't even have to go into prisons to serve the prisoners. We do something called Angel Tree through Prison Fellowship, where we're getting the kids gifts that are on behalf of the inmates. We've done like different kinds of kid outreach things and inviting them to our church for Easter and to be a part of our community, because the vision and the goal is once mom or dad get out, they're going to come to church together, and God's going to be in the center of their life. And so once we learn about who these kids are, what we do is we view them as part of our community, and we do whatever we can to reach out to them and include them in everything that we would want our kids to be a part of, not to treat them any differently. At the end of the day, our goal is for them to fall in love with Jesus and their life to be radically changed by that. But that doesn't happen unless we invest in them first, and we make ourselves a little uncomfortable so that other people can be comfortable and find Jesus.
Yeah. So a common thread throughout all of what you've been saying is relationships. It's you building relationships with people who are in prison, people who are impacted by family members being incarcerated, and building those relationships that last, hopefully, for a very long time. And we know that relationships change us. So can you tell us a story about maybe a specific person experiencing incarceration who you gotten to have a relationship with that maybe helped you grow as a follower of Jesus?
Sure. Yeah, there's a young man that he's 24 years old. I mean, he's looking at 30 years right now. And I actually was able to lead him to Christ through one-on-one mentoring. And so he gave his life to Christ. And he came to me the next week and he said, I feel called to be a pastor, but I have 30 more years. And I remember telling him, I said, yeah, but you have the greatest mission field right now that you'll ever be in. And so don't view your calling as something you have to put on hold. Because I think so many times we think the circumstances have to be just right to follow God. And the reality is God wants us to follow him as we are, where we are. And that's what I was able to tell this young man. And so every week I've actually been meeting with him, mentoring him and hearing about the things that he's doing at the prison he's at. And to this day, that was a year ago, and to this day he's led 58 men to Christ. And he's building God's church right there in prison.
It's incredible.
It's incredible, and it all started with just an act of obedience and really just a conversation.
I'm sure over the years you've gotten to help other people start serving in prison ministry alongside you. For someone like me who feels a little bit intimidated about walking into a prison, how have you helped people work through and process their nerves about serving in prisons?
Yeah, the nerves are valid. And the fear is real, and so you have to acknowledge it. But I always tell people, when you take a step with God, you're going to be nervous because you don't know where he's going to take you. Going into prison is a risk, but it's not a risk that's not mitigated. And the reality is, if God's calling you to it, he's going to see you through it. What I've learned is the men and women that I deal with that are behind bars are just like you and I, and they want someone to love them. They want someone to care for them. And if you come in there with the right attitude and the right heart, they're going to take care of you too. The reason that the state has processes that they do is to keep us safe. And so as long as we stay safe within the rules, then you're going to be just fine because God's called you to it.
So for anyone who's interested in getting involved in prison ministry, what are some practical, simple first steps that they could take?
There's a lot of different ways it could go, just to be honest with you, depending on where you're located. If you go to Lifechurch, then get involved with your life group's pastor, let them know, and they can help you with some steps. If you just want to get involved in the prisons, then go talk to the prison, call them. And every prison has volunteer services. It's actually a branch of every single prison. There's actually a staff member whose job is volunteer services. And usually it's the chaplain of the prison, and every prison has what's called religious services as well. They're required by state to offer them. And so if you call the prisons, they will walk you through what the process is. At Lifechurch, one of our mission partners is Prison Fellowship, and they actually have, if you go to their website as well, they have next steps that people can take to get involved into any of their sort of academies as well. And they're in all 50 states. So there's lots of different nonprofits that do great work. And I would encourage people, find the place that fits what you're feeling called to and join them as they do the good work.
Yeah, so it's as simple as figuring out where a local prison is, getting in touch with them, and finding a way to get involved either inside the prison or with people impacted by it.
That's right.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I would just say take a step. As long as we continue to take steps, we're going to get where we need to be. It's when we get still, that's when we get in trouble.
So just own the nerves and step right into it.
That's right.
Know that it's making a difference.
That's right. Yep.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Nate, for being here today.
Yeah.
Really appreciate hearing your story, hearing your perspective.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, man.
Sam, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so you got to talk with Nate, and tell me what is still sticking with you from the conversation you had with him.
I mean, so much. The first thing is like Nate just lives and breathes prison ministry. He loves these people so much. It's always been a part of his life. So he's so incredibly passionate for it, but he also makes it so accessible for people to join him in doing that. So that's what really stood out to me. Especially because that kind of ministry just can feel a little bit intimidating.
Yeah.
But he made it feel extremely achievable.
What were some of the things that felt accessible to you?
Well, first off, I mean, he just talked about part of doing prison ministry is owning the fears and nervousness that you might have. And recognizing that those are real and that those are valid, but also recognizing that there's every prison that is allowing people in to volunteer has systems to keep people safe. So you can trust that those systems are working and effective, but also that there's plenty of ways to get involved outside of prison walls. There's families, the spouses of people experiencing incarceration, the children of people experiencing incarceration need support and love and care. Yeah. And there's plenty of ways to get involved in those different areas as well.
That's amazing. I love how you shared that he talked about owning the feelings. It actually reminds me of Hebrews 13:3, and it says, continue to remember those in prison as if you were together with them in prison, and those who are mistreated as if you yourself were suffering. And so I think a lot of those feelings that may keep us out or want us to just, I feel uncomfortable, those are actually the feelings that we're supposed to press into, because they help us remember and be empathetic toward, these people are feeling those same feelings, and it's okay for us to acknowledge that. And then that helps us love them as our neighbor, because we're experiencing those feelings together.
Yeah. And you're talking a lot about like empathy, and I think empathy gets rid of this us and them thing that can happen sometimes. And another person who does a great job of getting rid of us and them is Jesus. So in Matthew 25, and I'm just paraphrasing, you can go and read it, but he's talking about the sheep and the goats, and he talks about, and we've talked about this earlier actually in this season, but he mentions visiting people in prison. And then he finally says, whenever you've done that for these people, you've done it for me. And so there's just we just have no chance at saying that, those are those people, because Jesus says he's those people. And I think that's good for us to remember. We're not like looking in or looking down or anything like that. When we're caring for our neighbors, we're doing the things that Jesus asks us to do, and somehow we're caring for Jesus. And it reminds me of some of the themes we're hearing of, our worth. It doesn't come from our worst mistake. And like restoration and redemption is a journey. And I would add to that, it's a journey, and we are all on that journey. So this week in your life groups, when you're talking about this, I'd love for you to just talk about how can you be a help? How can you care for people who are experiencing incarceration and their families who are affected by it?
And whether that is in prison walls or writing letters or volunteering at a sports camp, there are so many ways that you can get involved.
Right. Our next episode is the last one for the season. We're going to talk all about foster care and adoption, and you can find that video right here.